and welcome to Theory of Us, the podcast where we talk about social, psychological issues and the philosophical ramifications or those things that we're just going to go with it.
I love it.
So I am your host, Ed Barlow. I am a PhD candidate for social psychology, and I have my very first guest.
Ayo!
Go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Zach Holden. I'm the library media specialist here at Carthage Intermediate Center in Carthage, Missouri.
Yeah, but you have a lot of different hats.
I do got a lot of hats, yeah.
Yeah, so walk me through a couple of them.
So just everything I get paid for?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I am also a part-time children's minister at Christ Church of Oronogo.
Awesome.
That's just outside of Webb City, Missouri. We're a church of about 3,500. My specialty is the curriculum. I write all of our Wednesday curriculum and our VBS, and then I work with our on-stage teachers. We have about 250, 300 kids in our children's ministry in K4, and I help all the teachers who teach the lessons on stage, making sure it's appropriate for the developmental level of the kids. We have two different services simultaneous. We have a K1 service because of what we're going to get to later, Piaget,
right,
and then a 2-4 service that runs simultaneous for kids who are a little bit higher thinkers.
Yes.
I also work part-time at CIY, Christ in Youth. I am on stage for their Superstart programming, so I'm doing 4 Superstarts this year. Indianapolis, St. Louis, Tulsa, and then I'm hosting in Tennessee.
Man.
Yeah.
You do several different things, man.
I got a lot of jobs. Yeah.
And you did kind of talk on something that we will be getting to here in a second, the developmental side and Piaget.
Yes.
But before we get there, what I try to get, what I want to weave into these podcasts are the very beginning of the podcast. I want to kind of have a either personal or interpersonal process of some metacognition. I want to look back on the previous podcast that I had. What did I say? How did I say it? Since the podcast aired till now, is there anything that I look at and I'm like, man, that was garbage? How I presented it, was that garbage or anything like that? And how have I improved or built upon that since then? And so my first episode ever back in April was, and I'm just going to be honest, absolute trash.
Okay.
It was trash. And looking back on it, I was like, well, I was doing an impersonation of a dude that I like on podcasts. And so when I did the second one, like a month or so ago, I used that as a platform to say, look, I want to better myself and be more like myself in these podcasts. And you have a podcast.
I do.
And its name is?
Dad Shorts.
Dad Shorts.
Co-host with Scott Ragsdale.
Yeah, so look it up.
Yes.
Dad Shorts, Zach Holden, and Scott Ragsdale. Fantastic. I've been a guest on that a couple of times.
2-time guest.
Yes. Backed by popular demand.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Your wife.
And,
she said, get my husband back on there. The only episodes I listened to.
So, but you've probably been in a position, and maybe with your other hats in ministry, where you start to recognize there's a Zach, and then I put on a hat, and now here's the Zach I'm going to present to you.
Right.
And I had to look at that face, right in the mirror on those episodes because I was doing an impersonation of an Ed that I wanted to present, and it wasn't really me. Have you had that experience in podcasting?
Not necessarily in podcasting. I think Scott and I had wanted to do a podcast for a long time. We've been talking about it for about 1.5 years before we launched. And we kept putting it off because I wanted to get what I felt was our true, authentic selves out there. I'm a foster adoptive dad. I fostered over almost 30 kids, and then we ended up adopting 2. We have 3 biological daughters. And so we both kind of knew we wanted to talk about being a dad. And we just had to find like what we felt was the best format for us so that we could kind of showcase, what we knew about dads. I felt like there were just so many with podcasts. There's so many dad podcasts. We want to make it funny because so many dad podcasts are just so serious. Yeah. Dadding is a responsibility.
Right.
It's also a fun. I mean, the fun dad is a thing for a reason.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So we also want to make it fun, and that really for us was before we kind of started recording any of our podcasts. We wanted to kind of set that up. I do feel like I kind of had it was more of a self-reflection issue with a TikTok page that I want to start. That sounded really old.
Yeah.
TikTok account that I have, and it's I want to do book reviews. And I was doing some reviews. I think last year I read over 250 pieces of children's literature. Wanted to do some reviews of what I was reading to help out parents. And the problem I kept running into was I was not my authentic self. They weren't fun. It was just hey, here's this book, here's possible issues.
Yeah.
And I probably filmed 30 and wasn't ready to launch them yet. Couldn't figure out why.
Yeah.
I started watching them back and I was like, these are boring. They're just me saying, hey, here's this book, here's all the issues. So I kind of brainstormed again over Christmas break, and I think I'm going to launch soon my TikTok account where I review books, but I give everybody an award. And it's just kind of like, this book, was not the most challenging book, but oh man, it gets the award for funniest side character or something. Because I do find myself to generally be a pretty positive person.
Yes.
Try to find the best in everybody. And even if I don't really like a book, there's usually something I can pull out of it that I can say, hey, if you like, really funny dogs or really, sad books about, horses, this is the book for you. And I think that'll really kind of lean into who I am as a person. And I haven't found anything else really out there like it where we kind of white noise.
Right.
So I absolutely understand, not from the podcast side, but you do kind of have to put, I wanted to be this librarian who's reviewing books for people so they don't have to.
Serious.
And it's not who I am.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely not. And I had that. I just, and even right now as I'm recording this, I'm seeing more of an authentic, this is Ed Barlow, this is who he is. Not this, at the end of the day, you still get the Ray Romano Kermit the Frog voice. I'm still, a little bit humdrum. I'm still a little bit humdrum, but I still like to have fun a little bit. Yeah. But I want to continue to kind of find where I land on this. Mm-hmm. And it's like with the content's going to be about something I care about, social psychology or psychology in general, and how do these interact with, like, what's the philosophical ramification of this study or this part of human nature?
Yeah.
And sometimes that gets a little bit serious, but we're still humans, and humans can be really stupid, which means there's a lot of room there to have fun and to just kind of say, hey, look, we're that's kind of stupid or silly or what, well, like when I advertised for this and I said I have the incredibly intelligent Zach Holden, and what was your response?
I think it said something like your bar for incredibly intelligent must be really low when the guy you're having on doesn't even know how to cross the street.
Yeah. So
pretty low bar.
So if anybody doesn't know, would you tell them real quick?
About 2 years ago, almost 3 now, I guess, I was down in Arkansas for a church retreat, and they love Cane's, and I don't like cane sauce. I don't like anything that's white and creamy. There was a Walmart next door, and I got the bright idea I was going to cross the street to grab barbecue sauce, but I couldn't find a crosswalk, so I was like, well, must be a place to jaywalk. It was not. Then a car took out my leg, my foot went backwards, and shattered a bunch of bones in my leg, and interesting process. I wouldn't say fun, but it's
not at all. Not at all. And I mean, but that kind of back and forth, that's more of where I want to be.
Yeah.
And so I'm continually finding myself, and I hope that I continue that. So anyway, I guess that'll wrap up the metacognitive part of that. Do you have anything else any suggestion for me as I move forward on how I present myself on here?
So I think as long as you want to present hats, and I think it's important for us to realize we do wear hats.
Right.
You've had more interaction with me. You know that you and I can have a serious conversation.
Right.
But my default is going to be silly.
Right.
And I think it's important to figure out what hat you are wearing, and realize that when you're wearing that hat, it's okay to be less than maybe to your default if this is the hat you're wearing. Some issues.
Right.
I teach a seminar on trauma.
Right.
Over at Ozark Christian College, and there are definitely times when I'm talking about some traumatic events in my life, not the car accident, that's just funny.
Right.
But when you were talking about some of those more serious things where you're definitely have to be respectful of people who've had traumatic issues, abuse, some of those other things that are pretty serious, and they're not to be made light of. And so when you're in that mode, your professor mode, you're wearing that hat, you have to be able to present that. So that doesn't make it not your true authentic self. It's the hat that you need to wear to do the job you're doing right now. And so, I think for you, finding your, it sounds like to me like you're finding what you want this podcast to be. And it's okay if you wear a hat that's serious, if it's a serious podcast, but if you want the podcast to be more like your true authentic self that you are all the time, and less wearing this particular hat of, soon to be Dr. Ed Barlow, and just, hey, Ed Barlow, the guy who's, fun-loving and a dad and, all of those things, loves to, make movies. Great. That's that's okay too.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's necessarily, don't feel bad for wearing a hat, but
Yeah.
find what you're comfortable doing and what you want the podcast to be, and then be okay with the hat you're wearing when you do that.
Right. Well, as far as we can get away from any superficial titles and more towards, really who I am, I think that's where I want to be, right?
Yeah.
Is that I don't know. I'm finding it, everybody. I'm finding it. We'll find out.
I love it.
So, all right. Well, thank you very much for engaging me on that. And let's move on to the next segment.
Let's do that.
Hey guys, I just wanted to take a moment and talk to you a little bit about a book that I'm currently writing and in the proposal stage for, called Motivating Minds, Applying Neuroscience and Psychology to Foster Engaging Classrooms. I have put together the proposal. I've written several chapters. I've got it pretty much plotted out as exactly how I want. And I'm pushing forward with it. And I just want to let you guys know, first of all, that it's happening. And second of all, to kind of drum up not just interest, but intrigue, so that maybe people could start talking about it. Not necessarily what I'm going to produce, but the concept itself. How do we motivate our students in today's age? COVID is behind us. The unknown is before us, and getting students motivated to learn can sometimes be a tricky situation. And so the book that I'm writing is attempting to take one particular theory within intrinsic motivation called self-determination theory, and then another concept in external motivation called nudging, and walk teachers and administration through how does that look when you want to motivate a student, how does it look when you want to motivate a classroom, how does it look when you want to motivate a school, and what are the ways that we can help our environments be the most productive, the most positive for our students, to help them be as successful as they can be in our classroom, and more importantly, after they leave the school system. So we want engaged, committed, civically minded citizens in this country, and motivating students to better understand themselves and the world around them is a great way for us to get them there. So Motivating Minds is currently being written, and if you have any ideas, thoughts, or suggestions, I'll always be open to hear about it. theoryofuspod@gmail.com, and look forward to giving you guys more information on that as it unravels. So more to write, more proposals to give, more publishing companies to deal with, and we'll see how that process goes. But enough of that. Let's go back to my interview with Zach Holden. Thank you. So, you, when it was like a year ago, I came to you saying, look, I want to make a podcast. And I thought I wanted to do it on education or something along those lines, and it's kind of melded since then. And you were like, right off the bat, you said Piaget. You said, look, if we go into Piaget, I'm jumping in.
Yes.
And so what I'd like to do, because I do have some prior knowledge of Piaget, so my subfield within psychology is social psychology. Okay. There are some developmental concepts within social psychology, but there's not a whole lot of overlap between where I'm at and where some of those people are at. There are things that I like to talk about, but I have a lot to learn. And so if we could, I'd love to first start off with what you know, and see kind of where naturally that builds for this discussion. Is that cool?
Yeah.
So, give you the baton. It's all yours. What can you tell me, first of all, about lay the foundation for it, and then move on into, I guess, what you're passionate about and stuff like that?
So, Jean Piaget was an early century educational theorist, and one of his big things was that the brain develops in stages based on age. And for me, I have been doing some form of working with children since I was 14 years old. And now I'm in my mid-40s, so I'm almost at 30 years worth of dealing with it and watching kids develop. And over that time, you do hear a lot of different educational theorists and psychologists, and one thing that really struck me was the fact that, yes, every kid seems to go through these same types of stages in learning around the same time. Right. And for me, that his theory really seemed to stick and ring very true. I loved the fact that when I studied Piaget, he had four main four main stages. The sensory motor stage, which is like under age 2. It's basically like you're exploring everything in your world. Talks a lot about like, you test it with your mouth, like it's an oral fixation stage at that point too. Everything is still new. You're finding it out. It's the peekaboo stage where your brain really does believe that you've disappeared for a second and then you've come back. And then you move from there into about age 3 through until about age, I believe it's 4 or 5. There's a different stage, I forget the name of it, but the one I deal with mainly starts in age 5, and it's the pre-operational stage. Pre-operational stage is what preps the brain to be thinking more in a concrete manner. And then around age 7 or 8, you enter the concrete operational stage, and then finally at around age 12, 13, it's the abstract operational stage. So when I think about education, obviously I'm dealing with 5-year-olds through 18, so K-12. For me, it's those 3 stages where we focus on the pre-operational, the concrete operational, and then the abstract operational, right? And those 3 can really, just as you think about the way school develops, those 3 really functioned and informed me as a teacher. So I can't speak as much to, the early childhood side of it in those 2 stages, but those 3, the pre-operational, the concrete, and the abstract, just really watching that over the past 30-ish years and seeing the way kids develop, it just hits so hard, and it really does kind of inform not only the way I teach but also my job at the church.
Yeah, and so one of the reasons that I like Piaget is so Freud had stages too, but he was more of the adult R-rated version of stages, and Piaget was more meaningful to the letting the everyday person know really what's going on.
Yeah.
And also I guess Freud would make an argument that his was all observational. It was a lot of theoretical.
Yes.
Piaget was observational, and today's psychologists are really trying to make themselves seem as a field of science. I'm not saying that it's not a field of science, but they want to go by the scientific method. Right. They want to do studies that have data and data tracking. And there's something to be said about getting a notepad, a piece of paper, finding a group of people that you want to study, plopping yourself down, and just writing what you see.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Piaget did. And that's why a lot of what he's presented to us has withstood. I mean, Freud's has not. Right. A lot of what Freud has said has kind of gone out the window. Some of that developmental stuff that Piaget has given us has and will last.
Yeah. 2 of my favorite things about Piaget, when I think about like that pre-operational stage, which is what kind of led our ministry to separate into 2 simultaneous services, K1 and then a 2-4. But the 2 illustrations that really kind of spearheaded that was, so Piaget would take 2 cups of water, and he would take one short fat one and then one tall skinny one. He would pour water into the short fat one, and then he would take that exact cup of water and pour it into the tall skinny one. Right. And he would ask the kids which one has more water. And the kids in the pre-operational stage would always say the tall skinny one, because for them that's the one that looked higher. Right. So despite the fact that you and I both know, it's the exact same amount of water in both cups, it just looks different. Right. Those kids in the pre-operational stage were not able to distinguish that the shape of the cup really mattered. The other one was the idea he would have the kids, he would describe a setting. He's like, you're in the middle of a mountain, and now you look out the window, what do you see? And the kids would invariably describe what was out their bedroom window. Right. And they couldn't process an imaginary place.
That's right.
So when we think about, telling stories, like for example in the Bible, and trying to get kids to understand what it was like in Jerusalem when Jesus was walking, into the Palm Sunday, the triumphal entry, kids don't connect. They look out their window in that K1, and all they see is what they can see out of their window. Yeah. So trying to tell those stories, everything has to be not just even concrete, but it has to be painted in such a way that they can visualize and see what you're saying. Man. And it has to be directly tied to something that they concretely know and understand. They're still in that age where they believe, the Little Mermaid exists and is real in the sea. Right. That doesn't change until the concrete operational stage in around age 8.
So, all right, is there between 5th and 6th grade? Yeah. Is there a stage that separates those?
I don't believe so. So if I remember correctly, unless there's new information or data that's come out,
well, help me process these where they land.
So pre-operational is age 5 to 7. So that's
This is
generally K1, maybe into second grade. And
Okay.
again, it's an age range.
Right.
You know, you could have
No
kids,
one's no one's the
Right.
same. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you could have kids who start to develop earlier.
Right.
Around age 8, 7, 8, they move to that concrete operational, and they stay there until about age 12. And then at age 12, they move
Okay.
to the abstract.
Abstract.
So anything that's really abstract, like when we talk about love,
Yeah.
very common theme.
Right.
If you're talking about it from the pre-operational stage, you have to identify what love is.
Yeah.
And you have to very much say, I love you like I love, a friend. Think about a friend that you love. That's the way I'm using it. So you're very concretely defining it, but you're explaining it in a way that they have pre-knowledge.
Right.
Then you get to the concrete stage, and they can begin to process a little bit. Like some things are concrete, some things are not. I love pizza, but I also love my dad.
Right.
How is that different? So now we
Right.
can make a comparison between these two forms of love.
Right.
And then when you get to abstract, you can be able to say, what does love even mean? What is the love that we see here versus a dad? What does that look like versus a love of a soon-to-be spouse or partner?
Yeah.
And you can really begin to have those abstract conversations that a love is more than just a feeling, but it's
Right.
a commitment, and
Right.
all those things come into play after they've moved through that concrete stage.
Right.
So when you're talking about education, you really have to make sure whatever it is you're presenting is done in a way that fits in the right stage for
Right.
the kids.
So you're you're a librarian
I'm a librarian.
at a 4th and 5th grade
Correct.
center.
Mhm.
And I think when we were talking about this previously, you were like, yeah, I have conversations, with the principal here all the time. The principal, by the way, is the co-host
Co-host of my show, yeah.
of your
Scott
show.
Rice,
So
yeah.
you guys are able to work together and do the podcast, which was fantastic. By the way, so when you first got here and you started doing those videos with Scott,
Yeah.
I got very excited
Oh.
because so I am part yellow,
Mhm.
okay?
Yeah.
I'm more yellow than I am red. But you were just like this blast on the scene. And I went, okay, Scott really needed this.
Yeah.
Scott needed
Thanks.
a dynamite to go off,
thank
like
you.
right next to him. So that's just kind of who you are.
Yeah.
But you've so going back to what I was saying though, you you find yourself in a situation here with 4th and 5th grade students. How has how your previous knowledge of Piaget developmental issues, how has that impacted your ability to be useful here, not just with being a librarian, but also with helping teachers, administration understand what are the best ways to get a hold of our kids at this age?
So 2 things come to mind. I want to make sure I kind of touch on both, and then I'll go back and expound on one. But first one is think about books, ordering the right types of books for kids this age level.
Yep.
We were just having this discussion today with our superintendent, just making sure that books are at the right level for kids.
Right.
And identity, sexuality, those are issues being pushed to kids that I think, in my opinion, is hitting at an earlier age where kids are not able to actually think
Correct.
at the right level.
Right.
The other one is behavior. When we think about behavior, we have to present behavior in a way that makes sense to kids' brains at that time. And for me, one of the theorists I love that kind of goes hand in hand with Piaget is Kohlberg. And Kohlberg's theory of moral development, he kind of piggybacks off some of Piaget's research and says if the brain develops this way in
Right.
our critical thinking, does morality kind of develop in the
Yes.
exact same way? And I know that not everyone loves Kohlberg and has found it to be as standing the same test of time that Piaget has, but I just think it's a really interesting idea.
Yeah.
And I love the idea that the brain would develop morality
Yes.
in the same way it develops critical thinking. So those are kind of the two. And I want to go back and kind of talk about, first off, the library side of it. We as a society are pushing identity and sexuality at a lower and lower age.
Yes.
And I think the danger in that is when we do that, kids' brains aren't ready to think about it at that level.
Well, and you even were just reviewing that a moment ago with what does this type of love mean? What does this type of
Right.
love mean? And when you're talking about love, there is a duality understood here between something's going on with me and something's going on with this other object or person.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not really sure who you are or what's going on before you have the other. And so what you would have to understand
Right.
to really grasp identity or sexuality is well beyond grasp of those two. Not beyond keeping the politics, and you can go into the politics or the religious part if you want to, but
Yeah.
where I'm coming from, keeping that off to the side, just developmentally,
Right.
we are nowhere near where this is even functional.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
That's basically what we try to do. We try to keep, as much as possible, politics out of the books that we order, not for any political reason, but just because we don't feel like it's appropriate for kids as they develop. Again, we've done a bad job as a society of having these conversations.
Yes.
We're yellers and screamers right now, unfortunately, as a society. And so I'm going to yell and scream my opinion at people. And then, you're going to yell and scream back if you agree or disagree. We need to have more conversations about it. But unfortunately, we have to have conversations that are at the right level when we talk about having it with kids. Yeah. So when we talk about like identity, regardless of your political beliefs, when you're dealing with kindergarten, first, maybe even second graders, what you need to be focusing on is that understanding of they still think what's outside their window is whatever is outside their window, regardless of where they are. And they still think that, the same amount of water changes when they pour it into a different cup. Yeah. And when we think about books in that way, what we need to focus on is the identity of who I am as a person. Yeah. Without all of this other sexuality and gender issues that come with it when you don't fully understand it. Right. We used to have the term tomboy. That was okay to be a tomboy. It was just a thing that you did when you were exploring who you were as a person. It didn't necessarily have to be tied to your gender identity. Right. And I feel like when we are talking about that pre-operational stage, what we need to do is encourage kids to figure out who they are as a person with concrete things that tie to what they already know. Right. And their schema that they built before we start moving into having these discussions about, more along the lines of what is, gender, is it fluid? Right. Those are conversations we need to have, whether or not we're part of the church or in the public setting. We need to have those conversations, because if we don't, then we get into issues like we're seeing right now, where the Midwest is pushing back against like a transgender issue, whereas California is like fully embracing it. Right. And instead of having any sort of a middle ground, we've gone to two extremes because we don't fully understand the way brains develop, in my opinion.
Absolutely. So it's less and less about saying what's right or wrong, and you're more just saying, look, guys, we're not even at a place right now where we can have this discussion with them, because they're not going to be able to grasp the concept that's at hand here. Right. And I mean, even in a public school setting, which is where we're both at, I have no agenda. I don't think that you have an agenda. But we want to do what's best for kids, and that means looking at things through their eyes. What's best for you at this moment? Not necessarily I want to put you in that lane or that lane, but say, look, this is what you can handle now. This is your zone of proximal development. This is right over your horizon. This is where we want to push you to. But, talk to your parents or guardians about the other stuff, where you're going to land there. But keep the other stuff out. This is where you're at right now, and this is what will help you develop.
I think it's important, though, for parents to understand what their kids can and can't handle. And I know sometimes, we think about, well, it's my kid, I know what they can handle. But if you don't understand the brain psychology, I don't think you do. Right. We're pushing stuff, pushing more and more mature things down on kids at a lower and lower age when they're not able and ready to handle it. And I think that's causing some problems for their kids as they developed.
It is. So interesting, going back to the Piaget experiments that you outlined a second ago. And I think my audio just changed because all of them are on now. And I'm not going to touch them because I'm too afraid to mess with them. So if the audio changed, guys, I'm sorry. So my dad did his doctorate back in like the 90s or 80 or 90s, yeah. But for his master's, he redid the Piaget experiment with me and my brother and my sister.
Interesting. How old were you guys?
Gosh, I'd have to go back and look because I don't remember the exact year, but I don't think I fared well, which means that my brother and sister who were younger did not fare well either. Okay. But he did the glass pouring and then the little ball of clay. Yeah. And then, so that's somewhere out there in the world, the video of me and Alan and Rachel doing that. So, well, I may have to ask him to see if I can find that.
Question. Are you ready? Yeah. Okay. That's my boy. Sit right over here. Now, are these two amounts of water the same or different? Which ones are they the same? This one's definitely different from this one, isn't it? Yeah. This one's got color. Water. Yeah, water. You are right. By golly, we're on a roll. Water. Oh, well, we got a little bit on the ball, man. I'm having a great time. All right, now we're going to take the clear water and we're going to pour it in here. Now, see that water up there? Yeah. See that water down there? Are they the same or different? This has more water? This water. This. Yeah. Is this water? This water. Which one has more water? This. All right. Cut.
But moral psychology you brought up, now that is one area where developmental psychology and social psychology overlap. And so when I went through my program, social psychology, we did touch a little bit, especially during social cognitive neuroscience, what's happening in the brain, when it's happening, how fast it's happening. And we found that even there are things that are happening right at the moment of birth. And it's difficult to explain it outside of a nativist perspective. So nativism believes that you're born with innate set of instructions, something inside your brain where you just naturally know things. And I think that that's been a continuing argument back and forth in psychology, whether people are we're born with downloaded software or we're not.
Right.
Do you have a take on that, or has that gone into developmental psych at all for
I haven't really studied that, so everything I would speak would just kind of be on
perspective, your opinion?
I think about talking about what's downloaded. I think about Inside Out. I think about the way it aligns to the emotions
movie?
The way the emotions are hardwired, and the fact that aligns to I can't think of his name. He wrote he's an educational theorist down in Texas. Real great guy. Dang it, I can't think of what he wrote either. I have his book right next door.
Sorry, bud.
No, that's all right. Anyhow, he wrote that there were 6 hardwired emotions as well. He's the one who says how we think is what's real. It's the link to what we think, or how we feel is what's real. It's the link to what we think. I can't remember his name. Anyhow, he believed that there were 6 hardwired emotions. I do think that we come out with some downloaded information,
right?
Some things that we innately know, and then you think about again how people develop. Everyone has a baseline of what is right or wrong.
Right.
But how we develop our morality based on that, I think, develops with us as we age.
Yeah. But if we have something right at the get-go, that does kind of speak to morality a little bit. If we're talking about what's right or wrong, we might be outside of that a little bit, just saying, right or wrong to one side. We are talking about how we function as people. So, for instance, I mean, they've done studies with babies that show that before they understand language, they'll prefer people who speak their own language. Before they're really good at conceptualizing themselves, they'll already prefer people who have a similar or close skin tone to what they have, and even the same language and same dialect. So like a Southern dialect, the babies will start wanting to gravitate towards that sooner. So then some of the questions that we have in modern society now often find themselves along those lines. Well, if it's kind of woven into our DNA a little bit, it's not saying that we can't get better as a species, but it's kind of who we are to start gravitating a little bit more and more towards people who, it's tribalism. They look a little bit more like me, they act a little bit more like me. And it is, to some degree, it looks like at least, that there's some level of DNA issue happening there. But I don't know. I'm not sure I'm 100% one way or the other. But
so have you studied all Kohlberg?
No, I haven't. But so it's a C-O...
It's K-O-H-L-B-E-R-G.
Okay.
Kohlberg.
I will look it up.
He's the thing I like about him is he also does stages of development, but his is morality, and he starts with that the brain develops morality in the sense to get to the idea of you do what's right for the state of doing what's right. And he starts with the idea that when you are very young, there's 2 stages you go through. It's punishment and then reward. And the thing I liked about it is that when he outlines it, he talks a lot about how when your brain develops early on, we do this punishment thing. If a kid reaches for a hot stove at age 1.5, what do? Do the hand smacky thing, right? You're like, no. Now you're not trying to hurt them.
Right.
It's a shock thing of hitting their hand all of a sudden, and you do have the stern voice of, no. We're punishing them for doing something we don't want them to do. We talk about that early on. But then, when you try to potty train them, you don't punish them for not peeing in the toilet or going to the restroom like they're supposed to. Then you reward them, right? You move into this reward. So the brain develops these 2, they're kind of, interchangeable in the way that you approach, but it's all either punishment or reward early on until about age 5. And at age 5, you move into a stage where you begin to do what pleases someone who's important to you.
Mm.
So at that point, you've identified who it is. Usually it's a teacher. You have a young daughter who's in kindergarten. I bet she loves pleasing her teacher.
Right, yeah, 100%.
And she probably loves pleasing her older sister, right? She
Yes.
has people she's
Right.
identified, and she will do, like if one of them says something like, hey, go fart on dad, right? Go do
Right.
something like that. Even though she might, that's a silly thing to be
Yeah.
moral about, but even though she might know that's rude or disrespectful,
Right.
to please an older sibling, she
It's
might
time.
do that,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So that's the next stage, and it kind of aligns with the pre-operational stage, which I find very fascinating.
Yeah.
So it's around age 5 to age 7, and you begin to find what somebody who's important to you. Maybe it's Barney the Purple Dinosaur or Ariel or something. When this thing, Mr. Rogers, is telling you something that's important,
Yeah.
they begin to develop a morality based on it, which is why children's programming for that age is so important, like Bluey, for it to be really moral.
Right.
And teaching them what needs to be, we would consider at least socially acceptable. After that, it moves into the idea of what's done is moral when it's done for the best of the society. Why
Right.
do we have laws that you
Right.
can only go a certain speed?
Right.
Well, it's what's best for the society.
Right.
If we have a speed limit on this particular street, it's to keep people safe.
Right.
And so we agree that that's part of our moral development, that we're going to follow those laws.
Right.
And then from there, it moves into the two more abstract of I do what's right because it's what's right, and I do what's right because it's the ultimate right thing to do,
Right.
self-sacrifice,
Right.
versus
Yeah.
I'm going to do what's right even if it harms me.
Right.
It's the whole thing of, is it right to steal a bread if your family is starving? That's
Right.
stage 5, and then stage 6 is I'd rather starve than break a law or do
Right.
something that is immoral.
Right.
And I like those, again, hit right around the time that you move into abstract thinking,
Right.
which is exactly what we'd want.
Right.
So the stages really line up to the pre-operational, the operational, concrete operational, and then the abstract operational.
Right.
So whether or not it's an accurate theory, I find it fascinating that it lines up with Piaget, who we know
Right.
has been time tested and approved.
Has, yeah.
And if these morality pieces really do kind of align, which it seems to me they make
Right.
sense to do, how does that affect how we teach behavior
Right.
to kids and teach them what is right or wrong?
Right.
And for me, how do we teach them biblical truths based on our
Right.
understanding of morality and how it develops in the brain?
Now, and I do like Piaget. I don't know if I said this right or not. I believe that his theories have withstood the test of time. There were some people that have, take issue with things here and there, but I think
Right.
generally speaking, especially from an educator perspective or a parent perspective, it's hard to disagree with it when you watch them climb the stairs
Yep.
in this order, in the general time frame that he had. I was listening to a podcast that talked about Piaget to kind of prep myself for this discussion, and the person that was putting it on, his mom worked with Piaget.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and on top of hating Skinner, which I didn't know that Piaget hated Skinner. He hated Skinner. He also did not understand why Americans were so hell-bent on skipping stages.
Mm-hmm.
So he would often have American parents come up and say, hey, what's the trick to get my kid faster through this stage? And that was just anathema to him. He was just like, what the heck are you talking about? Like, that is the wrong question.
Right.
You go through the stages. That's the only way to get really stable in your life, is to experience all the stages, because they all build on each other eventually. It's hard to get to the abstract if you don't have the concrete underneath it, right? Mm-hmm. So very interesting stuff about him. But I also like you hit on the moral. You were right up against Immanuel Kant. His categorical imperative that never do something. No, I'm going to say it wrong. Never do something if it's not okay if the rest of the world doesn't. Okay, I'm not saying it right. Dadgummit, I'm on the podcast.
That's right. I can't think about the guy who wrote the book I like.
Yeah, right. So anyway, his point is, if everybody else in the world did it, what does the world look like?
Right.
So, like running a red light.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're at a stoplight and the turn light is green and people are going, and then it's yellow and people are going, and then it's red and people keep going, what does that world look like? Well, it sucks immediately. Mm-hmm. So that's why we shouldn't do it.
Right.
Because if I do something and I'm just like, oh, it's just me, it's no big deal. Well, what if the guy behind me says that, and the guy behind him? We all have a problem, and society starts breaking down if we don't think we need to live individually within a fencing that we agree corporately we
Right.
need to abide by. And that when I start going outside of that, then I start meeting problems. Which leads me to my question that I had for you.
Okay.
So you said something interesting, and I'm not sure I'm 100% with you. You said that you would rather starve than get a piece of bread. So you've been through this dilemma before in your head. Is that where you land? I don't know where I land.
So again, I was referring to Kohlberg's the stages of morality. I think personally,
Yeah.
I'd like to land there. As a father, I want to take care of my family.
Right.
And that's where I talk a lot about, political issues. I choose to be a pacifist. I'm 40 some odd years now. I've never thrown a punch in my life. I've never hit somebody. Never been in a fight. Don't own a gun. And I'm very grateful for our armed forces that I live in a society where I can choose to be a pacifist.
Right.
My wife constantly reminds me that if somebody came into my house with intent to harm one of my children, I would abandon my pacificity and would immediately turn into an aggressor.
Right.
Again, I get the opportunity to wax philosophically.
It's a luxury. Yeah.
Am I a pacifist or not? Because I've never been in a fight. But when push comes to shove, what would I do? I don't know. So I'd like to believe, I would like my example. I'm a Christ follower. Would I, like Christ, allow myself to be sacrificed for the greater good?
Right.
I'd love to say that that's my ideal that I would live my principle of my life on. Would I actually do it? If it meant my family was harmed, man, that's a debate I would love to never have to answer.
Yeah.
So I think ideally, yes, that's
Right.
where I'd want to get to. Am I there yet? Maybe not until heaven, but
Right.
hopefully I don't ever have to answer that question.
I think I'm different.
Yeah.
Well, I own a gun.
Yeah.
I've trained MMA.
Uh-huh.
I've been in bad fights. I've received punches. I've thrown punches. I've had my concealed carry license. I pretty much have my fire. Of course, I'm never take it to work or in my car or anything like that. But otherwise, I have it. If I'm always looking for if something's going to go down, how do I handle it?
But again, that's your idea of morality.
Right.
I mean, wouldn't a soldier's also match up with that? You're
Yeah.
doing that because you feel you're protecting. So
Right.
you're judging the value of life and saying, if I had to take somebody's life
Right.
to protect another life, that's a moral justification that you're willing to take.
Right.
That's not necessarily bad. Soldiers, police officers are doing
Right.
that all the time.
Right.
And we're grateful that they do.
Right.
We justify wars that
Right.
way. The Nazi aggression and the way
Right.
it was handled at the American intervention. Obviously, Pearl Harbor, kind of set that in motion. But
Right.
America was clearly helping the
Right.
the Allies before getting into it because of the
Yes.
atrocities being conducted then. So I don't think that that's bad that you
Right.
would lean towards physical altercations to protect a family. You're doing it on a basis of morality. It's not like you're going out there with a gun and shooting everybody.
Yeah, no,
because
yeah.
You can still carry because you feel like that's
Right.
morally.
Right.
You're a better person to have a gun than somebody else, and more able to judge the morality of a situation
Right.
than another person.
Right.
Again, that goes back to still you doing what you feel is right because of a self-sacrifice involved there. You'd be putting yourself in harm's way if you pulled the gun to protect your family to somebody else who has a gun.
Right. Yeah. I'm standing in the way. I'm the obstacle immediately.
Exactly.
That's true. All right. Well, so I have under my tutelage high school students.
Yeah.
So that's sophomore, junior, senior. I taught some college courses last year. I'll probably get back into it here next year. I've got a little bit of a break here. Where are my kiddos at, and what would you suggest for me at that age for how I interact with that age group?
So you're in the abstract operational stage, and I think what's important. I'm going to go a little bit off Piaget and talk a little bit about coddling of the American mind.
Hey, Jonathan Haidt.
Love it, yes.
He's my man. Now, social psychologist again, way into morality. Love that man. So go ahead.
So for what I would encourage you is to really lean into the abstract discussions and make sure, what I don't think we're doing well right now as a society is teach kids how to have discussions on abstract or gray areas
Yes.
in a way that is respectful, kind, honest, but to still be able to stay true to our own moral beliefs.
Yep.
So for me, that's where I would encourage you. They're to the age in high school where they're able to think abstractly about concepts.
Right.
What we don't do a good enough job is presenting both sides of an argument. For example, immigration. I
Right.
think we can both agree that people matter.
Yes.
So if we agree that people matter, then we can agree that immigration is a gray area, because no matter what, we're judging the quality of a life and what it deserves based on our policy on immigration. Either we want to build a fence and keep people out because immigrants might come in and hurt us, right? That's the
Right.
issue of the right side. We don't want to let people in because terrorists could come in with them,
Right.
or people come in illegally, and by coming in illegally, that causes taxes to raise, and
Right.
it causes our medical system to be as high as it is. So you make all of these judgments based on that. But at the same time, the left says the value of people matter, and we should be. The government will take care of all of it. So if the government's taking care of all of this, then
It's my beautiful wife, everybody.
Are you recording? Sorry, I need the key to get our children. Okay, bye.
I'm leaving that in.
Do it. Bye, Jenny. So we're having this discussion. We can both agree that both sides have merit.
Right.
So then we need to be able to have a discussion that doesn't lead to us reverting back to that tribalism of, okay, I'm on the right, you're on the left,
Right.
there's no middle ground. So I think there's nuance to the discussion.
Yeah.
The same thing with gun control. You said you have a concealed carry. We have to be able to have a discussion on if both of us working in public setting. You were you had to wait to start this podcast until after you had shooter training.
Right.
If we both want to preserve and take care of the life of children, some sort of gun control has to be in effect to take care of kids.
Yeah.
Those kinds of nuanced conversations have to be taking place at that high school level, because if we wait until they're adults to have these conversations, it's too late.
And
The
this
brain
shouting
is
match
forming.
is not
Right.
getting us anywhere.
Exactly. So I would encourage you, work with kids, teach them how to have actual conversations about abstract topics,
Right.
about answers that, we can all agree murder is wrong.
Right.
Absolutely. No one's arguing that. What we don't all agree is, what is the justification for military buildup?
Yeah.
And what is the ramifications socially, because we have, a war machine that is America, and
Right.
how does that affect our relationships and the foreign policy in Syria and Iraq and all those things, especially what's going on in Gaza and Israel right now.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to have those nuanced conversations and being able to, think abstractly about that while still being respectful
Yeah.
is something I would encourage. I think we don't do a good enough job as a society teaching that. And
I tried so hard. So I taught sociology when I first got to high school, and that led me to, I felt like, have a platform to talk about some of these things in a respectful manner, and the kids just didn't really want to verbally talk about it. But if I put it into paper form, opinion form, I started to get some better feedback. And so I still use opinion pieces now at the high school level, and it's never, Mr. Barlow's looking for this specific answer to this topic. The question is always gray. Okay, so take for instance, we do a whole unit on the men who built America. So the huge industrialists,
sure,
the Rockefellers, Carnegie,
Yeah.
and then I have the students say, okay, do you believe that they were robber barons, which is negative,
Right.
or captains of industry, which is positive?
Sure.
So it's an opinion piece. There's no real right or wrong answer here, because at the end of the day, whichever way you go, I'm going to kind of see where you're coming from.
Right.
They're people, they're not black or white, they're gray. And but what I tell them every day is that when we have these things, I say, what I don't want you to be is like every other moron on Facebook who only knows what they think and not why they think it.
Right.
So you are going to be allowed in this 1 or 2 page paper the ability to state what you think. Love them, build them up. Hate them, tear them down. That's fine. But you better not leave it there. You need to tell me why.
Right.
And I think that goes into that a little bit with, okay, it's one thing to understand kind of what's going on, the left versus the right, whatever we want to paint that as. Okay, now why do you see things that way?
Right.
Why? And that requires them to take the abstract and start tangibly grappling with it inside of their brain, instead of just being part of a group, which ultimately is what it looks like a lot of times.
I think it's important. We both know schema, and that you build your schema inside there. I think one of the things that's missing is we're not doing what you're describing, at lower levels of education. When I was in the classroom, I taught 4th and 5th grade for about 16 years before becoming a library media specialist. And when I would have my kids write an opinion paper, it would be something simple like, should we have chocolate milk in the school cafeteria?
Yes.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Should we be allowed to chew gum in class? Should there be age restrictions on technology? Those things, they're never going to become policy here in America. But to have an opinion on it and then be able to state why you have an opinion, and then to be able to listen to somebody else's opinion based on your their reaction to your piece, those are so important.
Yes.
And if we don't hit those at a concrete stage,
That's right.
then when it comes to abstract, kids are a lot less likely to engage in a discussion.
That's right.
And what I think that's what's missing is we're not building it in at an almost inconsequential manner. Kids will tell you, my favorite, I'm from Cincinnati, my favorite team is, Cincinnati Bengals. And right now they're the rivals of the Chiefs. Kids will tell you, Chiefs rules, Bengals stink.
Yeah.
Why? Well, and then I'll tell them, listen, Joe Burrow's 3-1 versus Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
Does he really stink? They've got 2 Super Bowls. That's not a response. That's not an actual response to what I'm telling you. And again, it's all fun with the kids, but you do have to be able to have these conversations, things that don't matter,
right,
and then move to more abstract concepts that do matter.
Right.
So I think I hear your frustration of kids not being able to have those conversations. I don't think it's on you, unfortunately.
Right.
I think it's on our elementary and junior high teachers who during the concrete stage are not teaching kids the foundations for having the conversations we need to have,
right,
that you then should be teaching, so that when they become adults, we can have real conversations about things that matter as voters,
right,
and as the adults and citizens in charge of our society.
So like we would have a section on racial inequality, and I'd go through a lecture, and then typically have like a video or something to reinforce it, and then I'd say, okay, what's going on here? Is it institutionally ingrained? Look at these facts and figures on incarceration rates and drug rates and all this kind of stuff in different laws. And there's plenty of there for them to chew on. I think it just, they're afraid of getting canceled. They're afraid of blowback, there's racism here or no, there's no racism. And whichever way you go, it goes back to that, they don't think that there's the ability or the room to have a discussion. Right. They think it's only an argument. And there's no toolbox that they have to be able to listen to someone say something that they may think is ridiculous, right, and say, okay, instead of yelling back, I'm going to unravel this way. Yeah. Which requires it requires the abstract. It requires you to mirror their mind in yours.
Right.
So you have to start thinking, okay, what are they thinking? How are they thinking?
Deconstructing their metacognition.
That's meta inception.
Don't think about pink elephants. What do you think about pink elephants?
So, but it requires all this stuff that I just don't think they have the ability to. And whereas I'd love a great conversation about this stuff, social inequality, gender inequality, all of these things that sociology affords us the ability to talk about, just couldn't get there. And I just think they didn't have the toolbox.
Yeah.
And it does, and I love what you said about the gum and the chocolate milk. Those topics are just as important at that age. I mean, that is the important part. My teacher doesn't let me have gum, or their teacher, even worse, their teacher allows them to have gum.
Right.
I mean, that's World War III right there, if that's allowed. So that's a very important concept. So hearing something that would go against what you believe would force you to have to start dealing with, how do I engage with someone that just said something utterly stupid?
Yeah.
And I emotively want to respond, but that's not going to help the situation. I need to respond cognitively.
Yeah.
Man, that's fantastic.
You know what? I wish I could take credit. It's from Storyworks, a magazine published by Lauren Tarshish, who wrote the I Survive series. She has a little magazine she puts out every couple months, and she always had one of those. It was called Debate, and it was you would read the article about something like, should chocolate milk be in schools, or should we have gum in schools? And then the kids were supposed to do a writing prompt that go with it, and I just stole it and would have groups of 4 or 5 kids choose one. It was like, you're allowed to write about any one of these that you want. You have to find somebody who write the opposite side. Yeah. So if you want to say, oh yeah, we should totally have gum in school,
right,
you can't write about that unless you find somebody else who will write the opposite and tell you why you shouldn't have gum in school.
Man. And
then they would just do the research together. We would have them go, and like for that one, that one was always a pretty hot topic.
Yeah.
So then I would have the kids go and interview, the custodians, and be like,
nice.
So like, interview the custodians what they think about gum in school.
Yeah.
Is there a classroom that allows gum that has,
more problems?
Right.
Yeah.
And then we would go and talk about, we'd go to the counselor.
Yeah.
And we'd have them talk about, I'm chewing gum now on this podcast because I have ADHD. It helps me focus.
Yeah.
Go talk to the counselor about, chewing gum versus the number of fidgets that he has
That's
to
right.
give away every
That's
day
right.
to help. And so we have them, kind of do their research together.
Right.
And then they can use the same thing, the same information to kind of form their opinion. And, we'd then get into the discussion of, hey, how does the left media or the right media skew a topic to make it show?
Yeah. So then this really does play. And it is all developmental, but even that plays into like when we want to support or get behind some sort of new policy. We don't always think about how it's going to impact me. And not necessarily how it's going to impact somebody else from another perspective, another life scenario. And that really would do that. Like, okay, I want to chew gum because I want to chew gum, but there's a dude who gets paid, not extra, to clean up my gum because I'm too much of a ding-dong and don't put it where I'm supposed to. And you start having to think outside yourself, which is a developmental process. It's, man... Never thought of that stuff. Zach, this is fantastic.
Maybe that's how you start, because I do think that's important. Kids, the problem is, education, we know we have to go back and fill in gaps. Maybe that's how you start your class, with something you're talking about them not having the tools.
Right.
Start the toolbox with something silly.
Yeah.
And then put the stakes on it and be like, listen, I've got, should we be having candy in class?
That's good.
And then start there and then have them build to, should I let you have your phones out in class? And have them debate back and forth to be able to figure
Jonathan
it out.
Haidt has something to say about that too.
Yeah, he does.
So here's what I'm thinking, Zach.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna start wrapping this up here in a second. But so I'm gonna want to talk to a lot of people about a lot of different concepts. But eventually, I'd like to also take different books that are very important in this area. And you mentioned Coddling of the American Mind.
Love it.
That is on my list. Mm-hmm. So. Would you mind maybe probably in a year or so, if we get back to this, would you want to maybe take that book, come back on here, and we just start cranking out what the book's about and start talking about it?
I tell people all the time that, when I think about my educational journey, 2 books really kind of changed. I guess 3, but changed where I was going. And the third one, most recently, has been Coddling of the American Mind. And it literally, I read it right before I made the career change to come here and be a librarian, because I was just like, I can't do education with where we're going right now and what the district I was at the time was doing. I just felt like it was very much, if you're not for us, you're against us.
Yeah,
and they were leaning into this untruth, and I was just like, I can't.
And I think especially right now we're filming this in early January 2024. There's some really interesting stuff happening in colleges around the world, specifically Harvard and UPenn, I think, and then maybe MIT. And it kind of goes back to this, what's being pushed out there versus how the rest of the world really feels.
Right.
It's typically just the loud ones on either side that are seemingly getting all the attention.
No.
The rest of us are not really. We don't want that. We don't want all that extra stuff. Either side, to be honest.
Right.
I don't like either of the extremes here. Can you guys just shut up for a second?
If we could find a political candidate who was a moderate,
right,
I think they would win on a landslide.
I would hope. I would hope. So if we get back to Coddling of the American Mind, can I try to get you back
Please,
on? That would be fantastic. All right, well, Zach, I really appreciate you coming on here. My very first guest ever.
I'm honored.
Hopefully, I was a little bit more myself in this. I will review this video and see if I got it.
It felt authentic. If you're wanting my feedback, I don't know if I like just our normal discussions that we normally have after school.
And we do. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Theory of Us. I hope you found it enlightening, and I look forward to talking with you guys next time. Bye.